Welcome to Phantom Chronicles, a channel devoted to carefully crafted true crime storytelling. Here we revisit real cases with empathy, verify facts wherever possible, and highlight the human truths hidden behind headlines. We aim to clarify timelines, separate rumor from record, and extract life-saving lessons without sensationalism. If you value thoughtful narratives that honor victims and inform viewers, you're in the right place. Today's episode examines the 2018 disappearance and murder of Western Michigan University student Anaya Mack. We present her story in 5 concise chapters: the unsettling discovery, a promising life and a troubled relationship, the confession and recovery, the pastor subplot and community fallout, and finally, the courtroom reckoning and the cautions that remain. If discussions of intimate partner violence are difficult for you, please take care while watching and consider pausing whenever you need. To our new viewers, each episode includes a careful scene set, verified context, and a closing section focused on concrete takeaways. We avoid graphic detail, credit public records and reporting, and foreground the voices of those most affected. If you find value here, consider subscribing and sharing these stories to help others recognize patterns that too often go unnoticed. We also honor the dignity of victims and survivors by focusing on choices, systems, and prevention, not spectacle. When a case involves sensitive allegations or community leaders, we stick to documented facts and make clear what is unrelated to the central crime. Our goal is understanding, accountability, and safer communities, not fear. Chapter 1: The Unsettling Discovery. On a warm night in late June 2018, a call to Kalamazoo police sounded routine. A welfare check for a missing student. Friends were worried. 24-year-old Ania Mack, a psychology major at Western Michigan University, hadn't answered calls or messages for days. That silence was totally unlike her. She loved her family, kept close contact with her best friend, and rarely went off the grid without notice. Officers arrived at Ania's apartment at Hunter Ridge, expecting a frazzled student who needed space from her phone. Instead, they entered a scene that felt paused mid-breath. The television flickered to no one. The air conditioning hummed. In the bathroom, a tub stood filled with water as if someone had drawn a bath and walked away. The washing machine ran a load that mixed household linens with men's clothing, while bath mats were strangely absent from the bathroom floor. Nothing screamed break-in or obvious struggle. Yet the details felt wrong, like a room rearranged in a hurry. Outside, detectives noticed more oddities. Ania's white 2008 Chevy Malibu sat without plates. A few spots away, a nearly identical white Malibu carried her plates but was registered to someone else. Both cars had flat tires. If Ania had left town, how had she traveled? The contradiction between an apartment that seemed lived in and vehicles that clearly hadn't moved raised the stakes. Officers began knocking on doors and calling anyone who might have seen her. Friends and neighbors helped sketch the last known weekend. No one had spoken with Ania since Sunday, June 24th. Tension with her boyfriend, 25-year-old Donovan Lewis, had recently escalated. Arguments, according to friends, tended to revolve around jealousy and suspicion. There were stories of prior volatile incidents. People who loved Ania were worried, though most had hoped the pair would simply separate. Police tried to locate Donovan. He didn't answer calls and wasn't at his usual haunts. Standing outside the apartment, officers compared notes about the bathtub, the laundry, the switched plates, and the stationary cars. They were missing something, until a figure approached from the shadows. It was Donovan Lewis. Calmly and without prompting, he said the words that turned a baffling missing person inquiry into a homicide investigation. "I killed my girlfriend." In most missing person cases, investigators build a timeline over days or weeks. Here, the pivot was immediate. Still, officers moved by the book, secured the apartment, logged observations, and began a canvass to cross-check sightings. Roommates, neighbors, and friends were interviewed to verify who had recently entered the unit, whether the laundry was out of character, and when any vehicle movements might have occurred. The early pattern, normal surface, abnormal details, was the thread they kept pulling. Detectives also weighed why certain details mattered. A tub filled with water can dilute trace evidence. Freshly washed textiles can erase blood. License plate swapping often signals misdirection, suggesting someone wanted to create confusion about which vehicle, if any, had been driven. Flat tires reinforced the idea that neither car had gone anywhere for days. Each small fact steadied the hunch that something terrible had happened behind closed doors. Chapter 2: A Bright Life and a Relationship in Decline. Before the case became a file number, it was a life. By all accounts, Ania glowed. She excelled in high school, split time between academics, athletics, and community groups, and carried that energy into college. At WMU, she studied psychology and worked with children on the autism spectrum, bringing a gentle steadiness that colleagues admired. She sang at church, danced with a local performance group, and reserved time for family and friends who knew her as ambitious, kind, and grounded. Her relationship with Donovan started like many campus romances, intense and hopeful, but grew strained. Friends noticed possessiveness and anger that flared during arguments. Some recalled earlier incidents that signaled the relationship might not be safe. Ania confided, at times, that the conflict wore her down. Still, as happens in many unhealthy dynamics, she hoped for change and tried to set boundaries. The immediate spark for the final argument was a set of messages discovered on Ania's phone. Donovan believed the messages, from a prominent local pastor named Strickland, proved infidelity. Whether his interpretation was fair or distorted, the effect on Donovan was clear. Jealousy hardened into rage. Ania, tired of the accusations, told him it was over. She began packing his belongings into a suitcase and asked him to leave for good. What happened next occurred out of public view, but was later reconstructed through statements and forensics. Donovan struck Ania, rendering her unconscious, then armed himself with a large kitchen knife and inflicted fatal stab wounds, including a cut to her neck. In the aftermath, he placed a bag over her head, folded her into the very suitcase she had been using to remove him from her life, and zipped it shut. He tried to erase the scene, stripped and laundered linens, filled the bathtub, and wiped surfaces. Panic guided the next steps. Donovan initially left the suitcase in a dumpster, then thought better of it. He retrieved it, borrowed his mother's van, and drove under cover of darkness to a creek near Comstock Township. Down the embankment he went, hauling a heavy, secret burden. The suitcase sank into the mud and silence. Back at the complex, he engaged in small acts of misdirection. Swapping plates between two similar cars and sending messages from Ania's phone to convey that she was still alive. It bought time, but not belief. Relationships affected by coercive control often follow a recognizable arc. Affection gives way to isolation, monitoring, and threats, punctuated by apologies and promises to change. Those patterns can be hard to see from the inside and easy to minimize from the outside. Ania's story illustrates how quickly suspicion and control can escalate to irreversible harm. Ania also had goals she was racing toward: graduate work in clinical psychology, a career serving children and families, and the normal rhythms of a life she was building: rent due dates, shifts at work, rehearsals, Sunday services. Friends remembered her as both disciplined and joyful, someone who planned ahead yet found time to show up for others. That future, so close she could touch it, was taken in a single night. Chapter 3: Confession, Recovery, and Corroboration. When Donovan approached officers and confessed, procedure still ruled. Investigators needed a body recovery, corroborating details, and a timeline that held up under scrutiny. Donovan agreed to speak and provided directions to the creek where he claimed to have submerged the suitcase. A search and recovery team deployed boats, sonar, and divers to methodically grid the waterway. Hours later, they located a large, heavy suitcase lodged in the creek bed. Inside was Ania. The discovery confirmed the worst fears of her family and anchored the investigation in physical reality. The autopsy determined the cause of death as multiple stab wounds with a fatal cut to the neck. Evidence of defensive injuries showed that Ania fought for her life, contradicting any suggestion that the attack was instantaneous and unresisted. Back at the apartment, investigators documented anomalies consistent with hurried cleanup. The tub full of water, missing bath mats, the running washer loaded with linens and men's clothing, and the oddly maintained ambience of a home left on. The 2 white Malibus in the lot, one without plates, one bearing Ania's plates yet registered to someone else, both had flat tires, undercutting any theory that Ania had simply driven away. Digital forensics filled in gaps. In the days after the killing, messages sent from Ania's phone attempted to sustain a fiction that she was fine. Friends and family who knew her patterns found the tone off and the absence alarming. Combined with Donovan's sudden confession, the evidence cohered. Opportunity, motive shaped by jealousy, and acts taken to destroy, conceal, and delay discovery. Even so, investigators treated the confession as a starting point, not the final word. They tested every claim against independent evidence. The location matched, the recovery matched, the injuries and apartment details matched. Together they formed a consistent narrative of a violent attack followed by concealment. From a procedural standpoint, the case demonstrates why confessions, though powerful, are never sufficient on their own. Chain of custody for the recovered suitcase and contents, meticulous scene logs, and independent verification of the timeline all matter, both for truth and for trial durability. Investigators also confirmed surrounding facts. Donovan's access to his mother's van, the route to the creek, and cell site data that situated devices at key times. Divers described the creek bed as silty and uneven, which explained how the luggage settled. Each corroborated detail removed doubt and tightened the narrative, not to sensationalize but to close evidentiary gaps. Chapter 4. The Pastor Subplot and Community Fallout. The messages from Pastor Strickland were not a side note in Donovan's telling. They were central to his jealousy. Investigators examined whether the pastor had any direct role in Ania's death, and found none. However, months after Ania's murder, a separate scandal involving Strickland shook the community. Authorities brought unrelated charges involving minors. In 2023, Strickland pleaded guilty and received a 1-year sentence. Many saw the punishment as far too light for the harm described. It is important to keep these threads distinct. Strickland's criminal conduct, as addressed by the courts, was not connected to Ania's murder. Yet the revelation that a trusted faith leader had violated vulnerable people compounded community grief and anger. For some who were aware of the pastor's messages to Ania, those later convictions added a bitter coda, an emblem of power abused. The wider impact rippled beyond headlines. Congregants wrestled with betrayal, survivors confronted re-traumatization, and local advocates renewed calls for accountability in institutions that serve youth. Even as the legal matters proceeded on separate tracks, the emotional cross-currents were real. People wanted safety, transparency, and leaders who earned trust rather than trade on it. In response, some community groups implemented stronger safeguarding policies, background checks, independent reporting lines, and training on boundaries and mandated reporting. These aren't cure-alls, but they shift cultures toward prevention and reinforce that authority is a responsibility, not a shield. Within Ania's circle, the pastor subplot never replaced the core truth. The cause of death was Donovan's choices that moved from suspicion to control to lethal violence. But the broader context matters because it explains the emotional landscape, why the messages stung, why jealousy spiked, and why trust in institutions took another blow. Chapter 5. Escape Attempt, Plea, Sentencing, and Lessons. Awaiting trial in the Kalamazoo County Jail, Donovan attempted a brazen escape. During recreation, he scaled 2 razor-wire-topped fences, suffering serious cuts before officers caught him near the outer perimeter within about 30 minutes. The episode added charges and suggested a willingness to gamble recklessly rather than face the mounting evidence. As the case moved forward, prosecutors charged first-degree murder, which in Michigan carries a mandatory life sentence. Eventually, Donovan accepted a plea deal to second-degree murder, reducing his exposure to a term of 25 to 40 years. Plea agreements in homicide cases are often controversial. They spare families the agony of trial, secure accountability, and limit appeal risk, but they can feel incomplete measured against irreversible loss. At sentencing, Donovan apologized. The judge acknowledged his cooperation and education, but focused on the gravity of his actions. Ania did not deserve harm, death, or to be treated as disposable after the fact. Her family delivered searing impact statements. Grief translated into memory and meaning. Some spoke of forgiveness as a path they might someday walk. Others were not ready and did not need to be. The court imposed the agreed-upon sentence. The law had done what it could. It could not restore what mattered most. Legally, second-degree murder in Michigan reflects an intent to kill or do great bodily harm without the premeditation element required for first degree. The plea avoided the uncertainties of trial and the strain placed on witnesses and family members. Practically, the sentence ensures a long period of incarceration, with parole review governed by state guidelines. In the months and years since, Ania's loved ones have honored her by telling the truth about what happened and by advocating for awareness around intimate partner violence. This case underscores the continuum that often precedes physical harm: jealousy, surveillance, isolation, and threats. Red flags are not abstract. They are data about danger. When friends notice fear replacing affection, when boundaries shrink, when control becomes a tactic, those are signals to check in, to offer support, and to help plan for safety. Safety planning can include documenting incidents, identifying safe contacts, planning exit routes, securing copies of vital documents, and using technology carefully to avoid surveillance. Community resources, advocates, shelters, legal clinics exist to help people navigate complicated and dangerous situations with dignity and confidentiality. Memorials and scholarships in Ania's name remind the community of who she was: brilliant, generous, and endlessly promising. Candlelight gatherings, service projects, and campus events keep her memory present while directing energy toward prevention. In the face of what cannot be undone, people choose to build something better. If you need help, consider confidential resources in your community or, in the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Wherever you are, reaching out can be the first step toward protection and a different future. Thank you for watching Phantom Chronicles. If this story was informative, please like, share, and subscribe. Amplifying these lessons may help someone recognize risk earlier, leave sooner, and survive. Ania deserved a long, joyful life. Telling her story with care is one way to honor it.